right, good evening, everyone. So tonight we are starting our third lesson. Tonight's another great lesson. Very, very important, really important. Wholesome health. Wholesome health. You may have noticed that there is a theme that's running through here. By the way, this is working. I think, is it? Yes. Whoa. The last two times I had technology problems, I called a guy, some computer guy, to come and fix it. He wasn't available that last time, and I tried working on my own. With tech help. Problem solved. I asked him, can you come today? No, he can only come tomorrow. So I spent some time on it. You see, God's wonderful. So he... So we figured out the problems. Anyway, so... If you look at, if you go to page 90, you'll see that our first section is called unifocals. You ever buy unifocals? Not at this age. What? Page, I'm sorry. Page 60, yes. yeah. Okay, yeah, page 60. Something's wrong. The vodka's working. Okay. So you'll see unifocals, right? The idea of unifocals is simply really the theme of the lens through which the Rebbe saw everything. It's almost simple, but it's not very simple to integrate and actually use. And that is the Rebbe's philosophy of spirit and matter. The Rebbe saw no separation between spirituality and physicality. This inherent unity directs the Rebbe's medical advice. Most people look at religion or Judaism as religious things that I'm supposed to do, and then there's a life that I have to live, and how can I balance these two, which often conflict with each other? That would be a normal human Jewish experience. And the Rebbe repeatedly guided people and also spoke about the seamless unity of the two and how the two complement each other and work in harmony with each other, and one without the other can't be complete. That means if someone's got their whole life together, their life, what we would call life together, but they don't have their spirituality together, what happens? What happens is they have anxiety, they're not happy, they're unfulfilled, they have no idea why. That's what happens. There are many ramifications to it. If someone just has their spirituality together and not their life together, they suffer. The idea is actually bringing the two of them together because they're meant to be together. That's why God designed the world this way. And that's the reason why if you speak to a very healthy rabbi, okay? A very healthy rabbi, I'm not sure who that is, but if you ever speak to a very healthy rabbi, I'm going to define to you what a very healthy rabbi is. A very healthy rabbi is a rabbi who never tries to get you to do something Jewish because you're supposed to do it because you're Jewish. They try to get you to do things because this is the very best thing for you to do for yourself. Now, the end result is going to be the same thing, but the driver is going to be different, and usually that should come across. That's why I always say that the Rebbe never had an agenda to get Jews to do mitzvahs. And I hope you can hear what I'm saying in the way I mean it. His agenda was you, as a Jew, the very wholesome thing you can do is live life as for the reason God intended for you. That's being wholesome with your Creator. He created you for a purpose. And that's going to be wholesome for everything going on in your life. A creator, an infinite creator, would not ask us to do things which make us miserable. It just doesn't make sense. And he wouldn't ask us to do things that are in conflict with living our life. Now, there's no question that there may be junctures in our life where it's challenging, right? And it may be difficult, but its ultimate objective is for the good of the person, for the good of everyone. It's the most wholesome way for a person to live. And that's always the guidance that we're going to continue to see through everything the Rebbe guided people. And it's coming from that perspective. And I know that what I just shared may raise some questions, like how can that be? Or, well, really, Rabbi, let me tell you. And actually, if you'd like to have that conversation, we don't have time for that now, but if you'd like to have that conversation, I would love to have that conversation with you. Not because I necessarily will be able to answer it, but I think it would be a great conversation to have, at least with a common objective of trying to find how, in fact, this is a lot better for us than we realize. And we're going to see in the ensuing classes, like next week's class about anxiety, how true this actually is, and how much our generation today is suffering so much from anxiety and other similar things. So unifocals are the type of glasses we want to wear, even though I reached the age where I have to wear progressives. I'm progressing. I'm finally progressing, right? Otherwise known as bifocals, I think. But spiritual lens has to be unifocal lens. And in 1943, the Rebbe actually wrote his very first book called Hayom Yom, Day to Day, which is an aphorism or a teaching for every single day on the Jewish calendar. And we have in text number 1 on page 61. Let's start with that. Yeah, we have to get that on. And actually,
There is a school of teaching that promotes the predominance of form over matter. It expounds on the unique quality of the material when it is purified, and the unique quality of form when integrated with the material. The two are to be so thoroughly fused that one cannot detect where either of them begins or ends, for their beginning is wedged into their end, and their end into their beginning. The one God created them both, and for one purpose, to reveal the light of the holiness of his hidden power. Only both of them together complete the perfection desired by the Creator. This is the school of teachings of Hasidus.
beautiful. This is really central to the perspective that the Rebbe had, which is really the perspective of Torah and the perspective of God. I'm giving you what does Torah mean? Instruction. What is God instructing us? How to go through life. Do you think the creator of the universe would give us instructions that are going to make us miserable, or that is the healthiest way to maneuver being a soul in a body in a physical world? So that's why we need to begin to see things. And we're going to do this tonight in particular with a focus on medicine, on medical advice, the medical advice that the Rebbe gave to people. He gave an enormous amount of medical advice to an endless number of people, and there are some repeated direction that the Rebbe gave to people, which is very insightful and helps us to see how to look at different medical situations. And we're going to begin with the harmony between the physical and the emotional. And we're going to see how the harmony between our physical and our emotional are also relate very much to the harmony between the physical and the spiritual. There are many studies actually have already been done about this in more common day, and that is that optimism and happiness are critical to how a patient does in dealing with an illness, or an individual does when they're dealing with an illness. Now, on the studies that we read, in magazines or in the newspaper are typically from a psychological point of view. If something is true psychologically, then that thing is also true spiritually, right? You're getting the drift here, right? If it's true across the board, and it's aligned across the board. And that's the reason why the fact that someone being optimistic actually impacts, right, how they respond to an illness is not only true emotionally and physically, but it's also true spiritually. And when we understand how it's true spiritually, we really understand why the optimism actually helps a person who's dealing with an illness. Because when a person is happy, that actually elicits God's blessings. If someone wants to receive a flow of of health from above, one needs to be in a happy and optimistic disposition. And that elicits from above health. That means when we come to synagogue and we say Amisha Berach, you know what Amisha Berach is? The prayer we say for the sick, right? And it's interesting, by the way, all types of Jews come to synagogue for Amisha Berach. They may never show up. Or maybe they'll show up on Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, if they're super religious, right? But that's it. And then suddenly one Shabbos they show up, Misha Berach, right? Because when someone's not well, right, we want God's blessings. So we all get that. We all, right? I don't need to explain that to you. And this is actually how you get God's blessings. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't come to synagogue for the Misha Berach, but I am saying that before you get to synagogue, find a way to, which you'll get some help with tonight, to be optimistic and happy, because that will already begin the Misha Berach before it's even said. And in 1955, the Rebbe wrote a letter to someone about this very point, explaining it at least somewhat. Let's read text number 2, based on the Zohar, the great mystical work Zohar.
I believe I have told you in the past that the Holy Zohar states that when a person in this physical world has a radiant countenance, they are joyful. They thereby draw down upon themselves responses of the same positive kind from heaven. This provides us with even better understanding of the aphorism of our holy Rebbe's, Tracht gut, wird sein gut. Think positively, and you will see positive results. May God grant you success in this so that you will be able to share positive news.
Very good. I was going to say, think positively and you'll read it positively. And you did. And this great importance, and as you see, God mirrors us. This is, by the way, in general, a very good thing to know. God mirrors us. One of the quickest ways to inspire change in our behavior is when we know that God mirrors us. So if you're stingy, it's not a problem. Knock yourself out, be stingy. Just know that God mirrors you, so God will be stingy too. It's not a problem. God says, you show me the way. Just show me the way. I'll follow you, right? You're judgmental? Not a problem. Be judgmental. I'll be judgmental too. God knows a lot about you, by the way. Even the things that you're in denial about. So God mirrors us, and when we're in a positive state, positivity, by the way, and happiness is a state of openness, of generosity, actually. When someone's happy, right? When you ask your parents for things, when they're in a good mood, every kid knows that. So when we are positive in a state of happiness, God's in a state of happiness, and that's when blessings flow. This idea also inspired a call by the Rebbe to change in Israel how they refer to hospitals. You know how to say hospital in Hebrew, in Ivrit? Bet Cholim. You know what Bet Cholim means? House of the sick. Isn't that inspiring? We take someone who's sick and we say, we're going to put you in the house of sick people. Right? There we go. Home for the sick. So the Rebbe said, why are we calling it a home for the sick? We should be calling it Beit Refuah, home for healing. Just that alone will change the attitude of a patient that comes into a hospital. And he was adamant about this. He sent a letter to the Director General of the Sheba Hospital, who the Rebbe had a relationship with, Dr. Mordechai Shani. We're going to see a video with him talking later in the class. And the letter was, you can see, let's go to text number 3. This was an excerpt from that letter that he sent to him. Yeah.
I certainly recall that when you paid a visit here together with your colleagues, we had an in-person meeting. I hope that you similarly recall my suggestion at that meeting. Instead of referring to a hospital as Beit Cholim, an institution for the sick, it should be called Beit Refuah, an institution for healing. One might consider this semantics, a meaningless exchange of terms. But in fact, this change alone is sufficient to offer encouragement to those in need of healing. More important, this upgrade in title better highlights the institution's true goal. Its purpose is to bring healing, and wherever possible, complete healing. So why persist in referring to the institution with a title that does not fit its purpose?
Okay. So the Rebbe was very serious about this, because this actually impacts the way people experience they're staying in a hospital. The question is, how does one achieve an elevated state of happiness? How can someone take themselves from, being sad, upset, depressed when they're in a hospital, which is a natural reaction? How can someone's spirits be elevated in such a situation? So the Rebbe actually gave people different points of direction, and we're going to discuss a few of them in order to understand how even though someone is ill, they can actually still be happy. And the first is a theme that ran through all of the Rebbe's teachings in general, and that is that a human being was designed to be productive. A human being was designed to be productive, and that's the reason why people who, if I can say this, I hope I don't get into trouble. The Occupy Wall Street guys. I know that's outdated already. We have better examples, but I don't want to get into any hot fire over here, right? Who are always trying to figure out who they can get to support them, will always be miserable people. Because anyone that's not being productive, they're on the taking end of things. Like in Kabbalistic teachings, we call it the bread of shame. Bread of shame is bread that's handed out to you. Now, of course, we all have to take at different times in life. However, as that is not that is not meant to be a theme of life, and actually that actually destroys the spirit of a person. A person being productive is the way a person thrives. And productive doesn't have anything to do with income. It has to do with just simply being a productive person. So the Rebbe advocated that someone who is dealing with an illness, we have to find ways to assist them in being productive. We're going to find some interesting things. But let's start with this video. Some of you heard of Joseph Telushkin. He wrote many books, many Jewish books. And his grandfather was a Chabad Chassid, actually. Wrote a book, a prominent book about mikveh. Just saying. And his father was an accountant. And he went into, and then the son, Joseph, who we're going to see now, went into the rabbinate.
Rabbi Joseph Telushkin is a rabbi, lecturer, and best-selling author. His father, Shlomo Telushkin, served as the accountant for Merkos Linyonei Chinuch, the educational arm of Chabad Lubavitch.
My father had a lot of nachas, a lot of pleasure from his career as an accountant. He never made a tremendous amount of money. He always made enough. We always lived well. But his pleasure derived from the fact that he worked for organizations that he felt passionately attached to. Chabad, he had a very strong feeling for, but he was also Mizrahi because my father was a Zionist. He also was the accountant for the revisionists and for an organization called Ezra Torah headed by Rav Henkin, which helped Talmidei Chachamim who were in need. So he had a lot of pleasure from the work he was doing. But as he got older, he started gradually to semi-retire and gave up his other accounts. The only account he always kept was the account for Chabad and Merkaz. And in 1986, I at the time was living in Israel, and I got a phone call from my mother that my father had had a stroke. And I immediately flew back. And my mother had somewhat underplayed how serious it was. She just said to me I should come home immediately, but not wanting to make me even more nervous. My father really at first was hovering between life and death, and he was not conscious for several days. And I came back, and every day we would get 2 phone calls, usually from Rabbi Krinsky from the office. The Rebbe wants to know how your father is, and I would report it. And then on maybe the second day or so that I was back, my father came out of his unconsciousness. He was still in ICU in the intensive care unit, and he was a little befuddled. It was, in a sense, my father at the time was 80, and it was very sad. He had always been in very good health. And as I said, he was continuing his work as an accountant, and he always had great pleasure. On Shabbos, he used to give a weekly shiur in Talmud. And my father's life, to some extent, was like a person running full speed ahead who runs into a brick wall. Because all of a sudden, in one day, he could no longer do his work, and he really couldn't learn in any systematic way. His mind would go in and out of being confused, but we would continue to get these calls twice daily. And then one day, about 5 days after my father had come out of his unconsciousness, I pick up the phone, and it was Rabbi Krinsky. And this time, though, he has a question. The Rebbe has an accounting question for your father. So I said to him, but Rabbi Krinsky, you know how sick my father is? And he said, yes, we had a meeting of the leadership today, and an accounting issue came up, and the Rebbe said, ask Shlomo. And, we said, we mentioned your father's illness, and the Rebbe said, I know, ask Shlomo. And so at that point, of course, I took down the question exactly as it was posed. I brought it into my father, and he was able to answer it. And this was an extremely moving event for me, because I realized there was the Rebbe in his office in Brooklyn with tremendous responsibilities for many things all over the world. And he was thinking about my father's situation, lying there in a hospital bed, probably feeling fairly useless. And he came up with a question that my father was able to answer. And I know it immediately made my father feel much better. I mean, my father looked at me and he said, yeah, do this, this, this. And this had an enormous impact on me, this incident, because it's what really made me aware to a remarkable extent of the Rebbe, who had assumed these international leadership roles and yet remained focused on the individual.
And it brings out the point that the Rebbe was so clear about the fact that the moment a person is living their purpose, it actually brings life back into them. That's why it's so important for someone to, in some way, so sometimes actually when someone is ill, we're very busy protecting them from not doing anything. And while it's a tricky balance, but it's very important to give the person some things to do which give them meaning, because that itself rehabilitates them. So that's just a very important point. So we have remaining productive. The human being is born to toil. That's a verse in the Torah. Productivity results in fulfillment, which is instrumental in healing. Whenever someone is being productive, and whenever we can give someone a way to be productive. One of the things that I learned in life is I don't like, by nature, I don't like to lean on people. And I don't like to ask people to do things. So my nature is, if I can do it, and someone asks me, can I help you? I got it. Don't worry, it's okay, right? But I've learned actually that sometimes it's meaningful to people to be able to participate and help. And when you actually say, sure, can you do this for me? It's not, the point isn't whether I need the help or not. That's the wrong way to look at it. The point is whether it is going to be serving the other person productively by letting them be a part of it. So that's a similar type of a consideration. So the first thing is to remain productive. The second thing is, very interestingly, and this could be sensitive, but I hope we can all hear it. And that is identifying the mission. Here's the thing. Every single situation God puts us in, He puts us in for a reason. So very often we get caught up in our reality. I'm not well, right? I'm not well. Oh my goodness, right? And we never pause to ask ourselves, why am I not well? Now, I'm not going to say that this is an easy question to answer, but one half of what we'll discuss now is easier to answer than the other. Why am I not well? So what we're going to see is, and sometimes we'll be able to answer this side of the question, many times we won't, but what is the spiritual purpose of my illness? There was an individual who had a foot ailment and wrote a letter to the Rebbe in 1959, and the Rebbe wrote back to him, and the Rebbe said, essentially the direction of the letter was that your feet, what do feet do for a person? They hold a person up. They're like the foundation of a person. If you have an ailment in your feet, I'm not implying anything, but I saw you looking at it. When someone has a problem with their feet, so the Rebbe said, you have to look at the foundation that holds someone up. See, he mentioned two things. I would never give someone such advice, but I would say that if your intuition tells you that when you have something going wrong with yourself, it's associated with a certain thing in your life, I would say you should listen to your intuition. But I'm not I'm not holy enough to be able to actually identify these things as the Rebbe was. But he said to this person that you should, number one, look at tzedakah, because tzedakah, charity, is money is what holds us up in life, right? So money is what holds us up. And are you spending your money, using your money in the way that God intends it? And then the second thing he said is to look at your faith, because faith also is referred to as the foundation of a person's life. Is your faith strong in God? Maybe you can do things which are actually going to strengthen your faith. And some of this, part of this letter is in text number 4. We're not going to read that for now because of time. But the point is that every single detail in the world, every single detail, every minutia of detail has cosmic purpose. Why does it have cosmic purpose? Because at every single moment, God is giving energy for everything to come into existence. I don't want to fly over this idea. I mentioned it in our class this morning. There's some overlaps actually in tonight's class and this morning's class for who's in our Monday morning class? Anyone? Oh, okay. Oh, we have on Zoom. Yeah, we have on Zoom some overlap, but no one hears. So here's the thing. When we make something, like someone made this, right? Someone made this. When they're done making it, they're gone, and here it is, right? I have it. It's not dependent on the maker, right? That's because the person who made this took matter and reformed it into another type of matter that now has other capabilities, better capabilities, but it's matter to matter. When God created the world, there was no matter. There was nothing. So when you put something into existence, right, which we never do, we never bring something into existence. We work with what already exists. When someone puts something into existence, which only God does, then whatever caused it to exist, the existence is now dependent on to exist because something caused it. It's cause and effect. It's a causation, right? So something caused it to be. If you take away that cause, then its existence just stops. It just stops being. It disappears. What caused all to be in existence? God's energy, which in the language of Genesis is God spoke, which speaking is a form of God conveying his energy. That means that at every single moment, and I know that this is going to be for us more philosophical than reality. It's hard for us to actually see reality this way, even though it is this way, is that at every single moment, all of reality is being put into existence right now by God choosing to send energy to every single minutia of existence. Which then raises an interesting point that if I have an illness, I have this illness because God is giving me this illness. I once had a woman walk out of a class I was teaching because I said this. She was dealing with an illness, and she was offended that I'm saying that God is giving her her illness. I did my best to smooth over that situation, but I didn't do very well. And she walked out. So I know it's a very sensitive subject, but the point actually is when we realize that the illness is from God, we understand that there is a purpose in this. Otherwise, it's random. You know what it means to suffer from randomness? It's meaningless. My suffering is meaningless. That's suffering. When someone is suffering from something that's meaningful, that's not suffering, that's pain. You may have heard that in the past. And so the Rebbe would encourage that we find the purpose. So, and in a general sense, so the first purpose, the first angle of looking at that, I mentioned earlier, of like understanding what part of the body this is and what does that represent. That's really a hard job to do. But the easier job to do is to say, where am I right now? Where did my illness take me? Right? Why does God want me to be here now? What could God possibly want from me? Well, what is my mission as a Jew? How can I bring that mission here now? There are a lot of amazing things that you can do in a hospital. First of all, there's probably a good few Jewish doctors, right? You can share a Torah with them. You can put on tefillin with them. You can, as Rebbe encouraged, we're going to see in a moment, get them to give some tzedakah, which is a mitzvah, right? All these different things. There are many good things that can be done. And sometimes God needs us in the hospital, and the only way he's going to get us there, I hate to say it, is and then we end up that way. Let's watch this video.
1989, right before Rosh Hashanah, my father suffered a stroke. He ended up in the hospital. At Rosh Hashanah, when I get a call from Rabbi Leibel Groner, the Rebbe's secretary, the Rebbe wants to see me immediately. The Rebbe came out with a kuntras, with one of the booklets that he had given out the night before. And he said to me, "Das ist für Taten." And then the Rebbe smiled, and he said to me, "Zog dem Taten," in Yiddish, "Tell your father that when he'll finish the mission for which he was sent there, he will be released." Went straight to NYU. I brought the kuntras, and I told my father exactly what the Rebbe had said. I remember my mother started running around.
He was pretty helpless in bed, but I took a pushka and I ran around the whole hospital, and I took money, and I gave the patients money to put into the pushka. But I sent a message to Label that please find out it's mostly goyim there. What do I do? So a message got like 2 minutes later. He called me back. He said, goyim have to give tzedakah. So I just went all over the place and gave tzedakah.
Era in hospital para operation.
Von dort in diesem Mal sind wir hinterher. Auch dann hat es im Hospital. Ich meine, es ist was Blockes. Das war noch viel, ich weiß nicht weiter. Die Morgen sagt, die Mail, der nicht nicht selber nicht so alles He is active in the hospital house, but spending Yiddish time.
Well, we've just started walking about now, so on Shabbos.
But you can invite all the patients to him in
Well, I'll have
the...
to.
You can pronounce even he has a speech here that he hasn't pronounced.
No, I'll tell him, yeah.
That he can use it in the... The problem of Dr. Kloppen in the tour. The language of his non-speak of Dr. Kloppen. I think so. Yeah. Dr. Ryan and Dr. Kloppen. Some got to the finish. Noch a Paris mit Physician surgery.
She's being admitted today for surgery tomorrow on the leg.
That's a new surgery. That will be a short period. You have his rocket push with you. Then you'll take it in the hospital.
She has it.
Huh?
She is taking a tzedakah pushka with her in the
To
hospital.
the hospital, yeah, and put its rocket there also. And I've got one matches in the hospital also. Yeah, then you'll have a good news.
Our child Mendel is not well. He was in the hospital. So I called up Rabbi Chadakov just to tell him that, I'm going, my little boy's in the hospital, and I'm here in the hospital with him. It goes quiet on the line for a little bit. And then Rabbi Chadakov comes back on the line and he says like this. Sicher hat der Eibishter nicht gemacht, dass der Kind soll sein in Hospital, und du sollst haben Magbas Nefesh. Certainly, the Eibishter didn't make such a thing happen so that you should be anguished because of it. Sicher is dort ein Fran a Schlichus dir zu tun. You certainly have a Schlichus that you have to do there. Geh gefinnes and do us. Go find it and do it.
Right before Yom Kippur, my father did come out from the hospital, and he went by the Rebbe for Lekach.
Mit Mischalien, als ein Waffen verwunden, und als ein bisschen so zu gesagt. Ich sage, es kann leider an Morgen, wir haben es nicht gesehen. Wir will alle die Kinder, wir haben lieben, und ein guten Leben. Dann haben die Waffen verwunden.
So wherever you find yourself, whether it's, they said, in a beautiful place or a hospital, God leads the footsteps of a person, and you're going to have to figure out, understand what is the mission of why God put me in this place. There's a reason I'm here, and I have to redeem it and find the reason and the purpose, the mission of my being there.
So it's training ourselves to always look at every situation that we find ourselves in, which really is a situation which God put us in, to ask ourselves how we can bring goodness to this place, right? Divine goodness to this place. The next thing that the Rebbe emphasized very strongly is to strengthen our BQ. You know what your BQ is? Should be able to. There you go. Your bitachon quotient, right? You have an IQ, you have an EQ, and you have a BQ. In case you didn't know, now you know, right? Bitachon is trust. To be able to trust in God. What is trust in God? Look on page 67. What is the difference between believing in God and trusting in God? The difference between believing in God and trusting God is a world of a difference. If you go out on the street and you ask people if they believe in God, most people will tell you they do. Believing in God is somewhat passive. It's like, believe, yeah, there's a God. There's a God. Oh, this must have happened because God wanted it to happen. It's sort of a very passive experience where I am receiving, right, from God. Trusting is active. It's not easy to trust. It requires a lot of exercise and development for one to be able to trust. Trust is active. It's someone who is practicing, remembering what God is, who God is, and that God only does good for me, and that I trust that God will do good for me. Okay? So belief is really, whatever God does, I believe is from God. Trust is that God will make this good. God will make this good. Not whatever happens, it's from God. That's belief. Whatever happens is from God. Trust is I am trusting that God will give me good. And that requires a tremendous amount of training and effort. And I will encourage you. Candy's on our Monday morning course. So I'll encourage you to. I have now 13 videos and counting. I have a whole series on a book called The Gate of Trust, which hopefully I'll share with you in the follow-up email to this class. I'm also currently doing a much slower series on The Gate of Trust. It's a class for women every Monday morning from 9:30 to 10:30 on Zoom. We've done 13 classes already. And if you want to radically change your life, you take this class seriously and listen to each class many, many times. Game changer. In just changing the way we look at things and the way we can actually shape things instead of just being, as we discussed last week, the victim of situations. So Yahab Bitachon is trust in revealed good, and Emunah is belief. So Bitachon itself brings about God's blessing. So we're actually taught that when we trust in God, that God will do good because God loves me, whether I am deserving or not deserving. Okay, that God loves me and God will give me good. That is what elicits a result of God bringing out, of God giving us good. The fact that we actually trust. But trusting is not something you wake up and just have. It's something that has to be developed. So trust then is very critical for someone who's dealing with an illness, right? Very critical. It would be wouldn't be the ideal time to start learning to trust God when one is sick. So we would want to start learning that way before someone finds themselves in that situation. And so the best time to start developing trust in God is now. Very good, very good. We're on the same right on par over here. This is fantastic. So there was a story going back to what the Yiddish that Nason read earlier. There was a story with the third Lubavitcher Rebbe. Our Rebbe is the seventh in the dynasty. The third Rebbe, who actually our Rebbe has a lot of similarities to, have the same name. He's a great-great-grandson of him, and they have the same name, and a number of other very interesting similarities. Wives, same. So anyway, he's known as the Tzemach Tzedek, and one of his followers once came to him and told him that I have a son who has been very ill for a while, and the doctor just told me that there's no hope for him. There's no way he's going to make it. And he was so destroyed, he was barely able to actually share with the Tzemach Tzedek what was going on. So the Tzemach Tzedek told him, Tracht gut wird sein gut, which means think positive and it will be good, which essentially means that trust that God will do good. And if you can get yourself into a genuine place of knowing that God will do good, then it will be good. He comes home What does he find out? His son is improving. He asks them, exactly when did our son begin improving? And it was exactly when he was leaving the Tzemach Tzedek's room. Because that's when he started to force his mind to shift to trust in God, and that's when changes happen. So this is also something that the Rebbe shared with people numerous times. Let's read text number 5. That's page 67.
I duly received the telephone message as well as the letter regarding your state of health. From what I have been informed about your progress in matters of Jewish observance, it is surely unnecessary to emphasize to you the importance of bitachon, complete faith and trust in God, not just as an abstraction, but in a way that truly permeates one's entire being. In addition to bitachon being one of the foundations of our faith and way of life, it is also a channel to receive God's blessings, especially for the success of the medical treatment.
So trusting in God is very critical in life in general, and especially when someone's dealing with illness. Let's watch a few of these.
יום אחד אני מקבל מכתב מהבית, שאבא קיבל התקפת לב, והוא במצב אנוש. אני מקבל מכתב כזה, מה אני צריך לחשוב? כן, אז אני הכנסתי מכתב לרבי, כבר אינני יודע מה לחשוב. אז הרבי לקח את המכתב הזה, עשה קו מתחת למילים האלה, הוא כותב, ולפלא, 3 סימני קריאה ככה, אתה רואה את העוצמה שבזה ככה, ולפלא, שהרי ידוע בכגון דע, ציווי נישואינו רבותינו, טראח גוט ורדזיין גוט, ואחכה לבשורות טובות. קיבלתי את המכתב הזה, ידעתי שאבא שלי חי, טוב, המשכתי להגיד תהילים וכן הלאה, זה יום חמישי בלילה. עובר את השבת, ביום ראשון עזרתי אומץ וטלפנתי הביתה. אמא שלי מרימה את הטלפון, שאלתי אותה מה שלום, אבא יצא מכלל סכנה. עברתי את הכביש והלכתי במינכה שם, ואמרתי שהרבי יוצא ממינכה, נו, הראתם שטויבס פמיר? אמרתי לו, כן, יצא מכלל סכנה. מתי? אמרתי לו, ביום חמישי בערב. אז הוא שואל אותי, מתי אתה התחלת לחשוב טוב?
לא היו לנו ילדים כמה שנים, דבר שמאוד מאוד כאב לי. וזה היה עם דיאגנוזה של רופא שטען שאני לעולם לא אוכל, מבחינה ביולוגית, אני לא אוכל ללדת ילדים. אמרתי לבעלי שאני רוצה לנסוע לרבי. אמרתי לרבי שאני רוצה ילדים. בכיתי הרבה. הרבי הסתכל עליי ואומר לי, הייתכן שבחורה שלמדה בבית יעקב תולה תקווה אך ורק ברפואה הקונבנציונלית, הוא עושה לי כך, ואפסה תקווה מן השמיים, ומן הראוי שישבו וילמדו את ספר חובת הלבבות, שער הביטחון, ולא יצטרכו יותר לבכות. והקדוש ברוך הוא יברך אותם בבנים ובנות חסידיים, יראי שמיים, ויזכו לגדלם לתורה, לחופה ולמעשים טובים.
God Almighty bless you to God for strength and prognosis. And to they seem to have more talking. God Almighty and you have more blocks for God. More talking, so have more blocks. At least you can swallow it, not malnutrition.
עכשיו, אנחנו ישבנו ולמדנו, והייתה תקופה שגם נתתי הרצאות לקבוצות על ביטחון בהשם. וכמובן שזה חיזק אותי מאוד, והבכי כבר נגמר, לא הייתי צריכה לבכות, וגם הקדוש ברוך הוא עזר מיד.
God will not bless you that you will not need to be talking because you have it in church.
אז הרב אומר לי, נו, soll sich noch einmal nicht treffen, solche Sachen, sollt wissen, alle Menschen zu trachten gut.
If you think about this realistically, which is very important, it's important to challenge ourselves with what our idealism should challenge our realism, so that we force our idealism to integrate with our realism. Does that make sense? It's very important to challenge, because when many people, they live in concept, and that's why in the previous reading, the Rebbe wrote that it's unnecessary to emphasize to you the importance of trust in God, not just as an abstraction, but in a way that truly permeates one's entire being. That means for us to be able to bring trust into reality. That means that when someone has a prognosis, which is not a good prognosis. For example, a doctor says, we can't help you. That in that prognosis, a person has trust in God. What does that mean? How do you do that? So I'm going to say what the Rebbe says to so many people, but I'll also say from the limited amount of my own study, that studying the gate of trust with the intention of ingraining it into our day-to-day living is the path. So I just want to say everyone should do that. All of the things that everyone's going to get help for, it's all there. It's just that this path means really committing yourself to, absorbing these ideas and again, challenging your real life with these ideas and seeing where you're at odds with it. So when someone has a prognosis like that, it's very easy to see how can I in such a situation, right? And if you noticed how the Rebbe spoke and how the Rebbe spoke to this woman, for example, right? What did he say? He said, how can it be that a girl who had a religious upbringing, essentially is what he said, went to a Beis Yaakov school, right? A religious upbringing, only puts her faith in medicine, right? As if there's no God. Why should we put our trust in God? God is infinite. Every time I teach this and every time I say it, I feel so good, because every time I teach it, I'm hoping that it's dropping, it's sinking into me just one iota more every time I say it. God is infinite. God is all able. God is the source of the impossible, of the miraculous. And if God wants to do it, God will do it. And when I trust that God will do this for me, that actually elicits that God does it. So just thinking about it that way, I'm trying to make it as realistic as possible, of realizing that there's an infinite being who actually looks at me. If you study the gate of trust, you'll really get this much more clearly. Who looks after me constantly, who loves me unconditionally, who will bestow good upon me whether I am deserving or undeserving, who's not judgmental, only to the extent that I'm judgmental and project that on him, right? And then all of a sudden I trust that God's going to be there for me. And it doesn't need to be realistic, because God is not realistic. Only everyone else is realistic. But thank God you know God, right? And God's not realistic. He's not stuck in that box. Sorry, he lives in a much broader box, in no box actually. In the boxless universe is where God lives. Here's something that the Rebbe wrote to someone in 1953 to help them in dealing with a prognosis, and he used some spiritual and practical advice to help a person get out of the being stuck in the belief that the doctor said and there's only despair. Let's read text number 6.
There's no basis for despondency or despair, for we have clearly seen God perform nature-transcending miracles, even for individuals, and especially in recent years. Moreover, in many instances, doctors err in their diagnosis, despite conducting a plethora of tests. This is especially true with diagnostics related to internal organs. In addition to all the above, you should be aware that new medical remedies are constantly appearing. However, it is of utmost necessity, it is impossible for it to be otherwise, that you strengthen your connection with God, the healer of all flesh and performer of wonders. This description is to be taken literally. God performs actual miracles and wonders for individuals, the proof being that each and every one of us recites his blessing. And were it untrue, we would be erring by reciting a form of blessing in vain.
Excellent. There were even instances, which this is not an instruction to do, but there were instances where the Rebbe instructed people that when there was someone suffering with an illness, the Rebbe told the person, make a celebratory meal now while the person is still ill for the upcoming outcome of the person healing. In other words, you should act in a full disposition of knowing that this person is going to get better. Display that trust fully as a way of eliciting that actual outcome. That's how strong, powerful bitachon is. Now, there's another interesting thing here, which actually we're going to read in this week's Torah portion. This week's Torah portion, which we just read from the Torah this morning, because it's in the first reading, which we read on Monday and Thursday morning as well, where there are two words in this week's Torah portion, which conclude the first aliyah, virapo yirape, and healing you shall heal. So our sages teach us that from here we learn that doctors were given permission to heal. Now that sounds like a funny thing, like doctors they need permission to heal. Shouldn't we be healing people? But actually, it depends from what perspective you look at things. If you look at things out of the perspective we were just talking, right, and out of the perspective of there being an infinite God, and us having trust in God, faith in God, maybe we shouldn't be going to a doctor. Maybe we should just trust in God. Now, by the way, this is a serious and compelling question. Now, this may go against the grain of everything we know, which I get, right? That's because, by the way, I just want to say, because we're so entrenched in realism and reality, not in faith and the divine and the infinite. But this is a serious question. It's a compelling question from the side of spirituality, of the divine. And their answer is because the Torah, God, wants us to operate within the realm of nature. And that's why God instructs us in the Torah, virapo yirape. I want you to go to a doctor. I want doctors to administer healing. I want you to study science, the science of medicine, to the fullest extent that you can, learn as much as you can, and administer that to help people as much as you can. And through that, I will send my blessing of healing. So therefore, and the last words I said were the most critical, that through that, God sends his blessing of healing. So therefore, God says, I want you to go to a doctor. And that's the reason why the Rebbe always instructed people to go to a doctor and to listen to the doctor. You know Jews, right? We actually had on our class this morning, there's a doctor who takes the class, and she shares something really interesting. She said how she struggles with the fact that she has patients that come in. She tells them what they should do. She'll tell them 5 things that they should do. They only do 1 of them. Or she tells them things to do and they don't do it at all. They find something else on the internet, or they go to another doctor and they're doing something else, right? And then she said something really fascinating. And she said, and when I'm not well, she's dealt with a few things over the last year, and when I'm not well and I go to a doctor, I find myself doing the same thing. But anyway, we have that tendency, and the Rebbe made a point of saying that actually we have an instruction from the Torah to follow the directives of a doctor and do what the doctor says. That doesn't mean that we can't have a conversation with the doctor. It doesn't mean we can't question the doctor, etc. And we're going to see also about going to more than one doctor, which is a very valuable thing for someone to do before making decisions. But ultimately, at the end of it all, at the end of the process, we should be listening to the doctor. Let's read text number 9. We're jumping to text number 9. That's on page 72.
You should observe our sage's directive to follow your doctor's orders and do it happily. What difference does it make to you if you fulfill God's will in a particular way or through particular means? The main thing is to avoid overthinking the matter and to instead focus on doing God's will. In this case, God has directed you to obey your doctor, so you should do so and be gratified that you have the opportunity to fulfill God's will, and you should therefore do it with joy. In fact, when you will act in this manner, God will help you so that you will clearly see gratifying results. I hope that you will write back to inform me that you have adopted this approach, and may God add in His blessings to you and your family for good health and ample livelihood.
Beautiful. So actually, as we see up here, a doctor is God's agent for healing. Following the doctor's orders is following God's wishes. So you want to be a man of God, right? Say, I'm trusting in God, and trust in God, and go to a doctor, because that's what God tells us to do. You see, if someone goes to a doctor and trusts in the doctor, then they're not trusting in God. But if someone goes to the doctor knowing, okay, and the more we develop ourselves and integrate this into ourselves, we merge the two, then we know that this doctor is going to administer health to me, because through this doctor, God is going to send me my blessing of health. You know, it's like when someone has to go through surgery, and you decided on the surgeon, you did research, you got the surgeon that you want, and the person's going to surgery, and now I'm worried whether the surgeon might make a mistake. Do you know that it's impossible for the surgeon to make a mistake? If God determines that you are going to have a successful surgery, the surgeon cannot make a mistake. It's impossible. He can't mess it up. He cannot mess it up. You can't stop God's will. Impossible. So there's nothing to worry about. There's just me knowing I am in the hands of God. And it's going to be administered through this doctor. So actually listening to a doctor doesn't contradict faith, it expresses faith. Not listening to the doctor, worrying, or having lack of trust, all of that actually is, in fact, a lack of faith. Let's read text number 10, another letter the Rebbe wrote to someone.
I am pained to hear that you are spending all your time running frantically to doctors. I'm astonished at your husband as well. What is justification for this misuse of your trait of clarity? Clarity is generally a beneficial quality, but panic is always a fault. Anyway, clarity is not always appropriate. You should be filled with faith and trust in God, who creates, sustains, and animates the entire universe and all its contents, with even more particular attention to each Jew, being that they are members of the nation that is close to him. Trust that he will provide you with good health, so that together with your husband you will raise your son to Torah and to marriage and to good deeds. True, it's always necessary to follow natural channels. You must consult a doctor and follow their instructions. However, totally engrossing yourself in the matter of immersing yourself in medicine and medical matters, and intensely deliberating and debating the exact reasons for doctors' opinions, that is not your role. That is exclusively the realm of medical professionals, performing their duties as the Torah directs. He should administer healing. Everyone else needs to use the intelligence and mental skills with which God has blessed them for alternative concerns. Some of Torah study and mitzvah observance, others for conducting material affairs that are able to be transformed into mitzvahs-based undertakings. But anxiety, worry, and dejection serve only to weaken your physical and spiritual health.
Excellent. So, so the Rebbe was very adamant about people being in control of their emotions and to be focused on where your blessing of health comes from and going to a doctor through whom God sends the blessings. The Rebbe did give these other two pieces of advice as well. In 1988, the Rebbe spoke about the fact that he no longer has the time to be able to respond to the many questions about medicine, medical issues, which was one of the first things people would come to the Rebbe about. So the Rebbe gave this guidance. Number one, always get a second opinion. Always get a second opinion. Was that a question? Okay. Well, we're good? Okay. Always get a second opinion. Don't just go to one doctor, go to a second doctor. We know that human beings are limited. So you want to do a wholesome, have a wholesome approach. And he said that it's best to speak to a Rofei Yedid. A Rofei Yedid is a doctor who is also a personal friend. If you have a doctor who's a personal friend, they have an interest in you, which is much greater than any other doctor will have, because they're friendly with you. So they care about you. They'll go the extra mile. They'll really think into your situation, which a lot of times is what medicine needs, to really, look at much more than just the basic facts of what's of the problem. So this was advice that the Rebbe gave, and the Rebbe said, follow this process. Follow this process. Get two doctors. Get the opinion of two doctors. Review it with a doctor who is a friend. Have faith. Trust in God. And don't listen to a doctor's prognosis. The Rebbe used to tell people, God did not give doctors the right to tell them what's going to happen to them, to tell patients what's going to happen to them. He only gave them a right to heal. And if they don't have anything to do, they don't have anything to do. But to tell the patient what's going to happen to them is not their right. And that's why the Rebbe wrote many times that very often doctors said one thing and something else happened. The outcome is very different. Let's watch this video.
Esty Ash lives in Johannesburg, South Africa, with her family.
Kids were older. They were all avid bike riders. Uriel went outside. He was going up the road. He didn't take his helmet. And he was riding in the street. And it was a very narrow street with cars parked on both sides, and a car was obviously trying to get through. With Uriel in the street, he couldn't, so he hooted at Uriel. Uriel turned around to look at the car, and as he turned his bike in front of the car as well, and the car hit him. And he flew off his bike over the hood of the car and smashed the windscreen with his head. The ambulance came to take us, and I was asking them questions, and they didn't answer me, and he was unconscious. There was no response. When we got to the hospital, they took Uriel away to try to resuscitate him, and they sent me to fill in the form. And one of the questions on the form is age. Now, this was a week before Uriel's 14th birthday, but I desperately needed 14, so I didn't write 13. I wrote 14, even though he was technically still 13. I needed that 14, so I wrote 14, and that became relevant later too. They called me in to talk to him and hold his hand and see if it would elicit a reaction, and it didn't. A lady came, she gave me some money to make a phone call, and I phoned Michael, and Michael's my husband, and I made it sound like it wasn't serious, and he came to the hospital, and then they called us both in to see if we could get a reaction out of Uriel, hold his hand, stroke his head, talk to him. There was nothing. And I think when Michael realized the gravity of the situation, he phoned Rabbi Lipsker, who was a close friend of ours. He phoned the Rebbe's office for a bracha, and also because there was no reaction from Uriel, the doctor in charge, the registrar in charge of trauma, casualty, had decided that they weren't going to take any active medical care as far as he was concerned. They were just going to leave him. And then came the Rebbe's bracha. The Rebbe basically said, Askir al Atzion, we should hear Basuras Tovos. And there was a specific message to the doctor saying that he is a rofeh, and as a rofeh, a doctor, he is a shaliach of Hashem. And his job is to administer treatment and do whatever he can, and Hashem will decide the outcome. And as a result of that, he decided to go against the instructions of his superior doctor and administer treatment. So they took Uriel, they didn't even put him in ICU because they weren't going to bother doing anything with him, but they put him in a normal ward. Now, the best ward in the hospital was the pediatric ward, and the maximum age for the pediatric ward is 13. But I'd written 14 on the form. But Gary Schwartz, the doctor, knowing that this was the best ward in the hospital, put him into the pediatric ward. And against the instructions of his superior doctor, he put him on a respirator and administered whatever medical treatment he could for Uriel to save his life. Early the next morning, at about 6, Uriel came to. And all I could say is that it was seeing the Nefesh Elokis at work, because with his eyes still closed, he did this, and he did this. He wanted Negovas. I mean, he had just come round. It was amazing. And when the doctor in charge came to do his rounds, and he saw that Uriel was wide awake, I think he learned a very big lesson. But as for Gary, this was the first step in his journey to becoming frum. He had witnessed a miracle.
So we don't heed doctors' prognoses, and they shouldn't be giving them. They should just be focused on healing. And so let's just do a quick recap over here. How to remain emotionally positive when facing a medical challenge. Keep yourself as productive as possible. Identify a spiritual mission within the challenge and focus on completing it. And have faith in God. These are this is the guidance the Rebbe gave for when someone is dealing with an illness. Now let's talk about the fact that the physical impacts the spiritual. The Rambam, Maimonides, writes something that the Rebbe would repeat quite often. In fact, the Rebbe repeated it so often that I actually know it by heart, just from the Rebbe quoting it. And that is that keeping a body healthy and strong is part of the path of serving God. That means that keeping ourselves healthy is service of God. Anything involved in keeping us healthy is part of service of God. That's a very, very important statement, which also leads to a very strong perspective that the Rebbe spoke about as well. But before we get to that perspective, it's also in the understanding that it's not only that the need for the body to be healthy so we can serve God, but there's a deeper idea, and that is that the body itself is a holy entity. That's how we look at the body. I'm going to read in text number 13, the middle paragraph. I heard directly from my saintly father-in-law, the Rebbe, that his own father, the Rebbe Rashab, said, "Look how precious the Jewish body is to God. He provided us with so much for its sake. As is known, God specifically chose to give his Torah and the mitzvot to souls that are housed in corporeal bodies and not to angels." Why did he give us the Torah? Why didn't he give the angels the Torah? Because we are souls in bodies, and that makes our bodies precious. Now, if the Creator considers the body so very precious, we must be exceptionally careful to take good care of this treasured deposit with which God has entrusted us. And that gives us an obligation to take care of our body. Unlike many youth who like to say, and maybe adults do as well, I don't know, that it's my body, I can do whatever I want with it. Actually, it's not your body. It was given on loan to you by God to fulfill a purpose, and therefore we have an obligation to take care of our body. And that's the reason why the Rebbe was a major advocate of preventive medicine. Preventive medicine. Few people even think about this. It's hard to be honest, right? It's easier to just live through life, and especially with all the things we have to deal with in life, it's much easier to, not care so much for our body, because it seems to be, it doesn't get any easier to care for the body. But it's critical for us to do, and that's a responsibility that we have to take care of our health. And even if you walk out of the class tonight and you just ask yourself, what is one thing I can do to enhance, improve my health, and you start doing that, that's a service of God, and the body that God has given you. Another important point, just like the physical impacts the spiritual impacts the physical. The benefits of the Torah directives are material. The Rebbe advised improving mitzvah observance. We have to, as we see through medicine, and as we've discussed through medicine, the blessing of health comes from God. God sends his blessing through a doctor, right? That's why we go to a doctor. But the blessing actually comes from God. All of our blessings come from God. Our livelihood comes from God. Our business is just a structure through which God sends his blessing. There are many other people who have the same structure and they don't do nearly as well as we do. So we have to realize that spiritual health impacts our physical health. And that's the reason why the Rebbe gave instruction to people when they were not, when they weren't well, and they informed him about it, to do spiritual things, divine things, because that will actually bring more blessing into one's life. By way of example, just occurred to me, some of you may have realized that last week we didn't have hot water because our hot water urn broke. So someone came over to me after the class and said, my wife and I would like to sponsor a new hot water urn in the merit of our friend who's not well. Now, I don't think that I'm preaching this now, but I don't think that I begin to appreciate the impact that an act of tzedakah has on someone who's not well. One of the first things the Rebbe told people to do if they're not well is mitzvos. One of them always being, as you saw in the videos, take a tzedakah box to the hospital with you, put this dollar in tzedakah in the hospital, get other people to do the same. Gentiles also have a mitzvah of tzedakah, and get them to give tzedakah as well. That's actually a way of creating change. And the reason why is because, as I mentioned, I think 2 weeks ago, when God created the world, what did he use as a blueprint? The Torah. The Torah actually is designed, the world actually is designed based on the Torah, the principles, the spiritual principles of the Torah. So when we are aligned with the spiritual principles of the Torah, the world and our personal worlds thrive in a much more productive way. Let's read text number 15, page 80.
I received your letter in which you shared the news about Mr. Blank and his family, that he is suffering from various medical issues, and that his wife is also not in a good state of health. You requested a blessing for them. You need to explain to them that God, the Holy and Blessed King of Kings, is the sole owner and director of this universe and all its contents. God himself is the ultimate in goodness, kindness, and mercy. All that we must do is prepare appropriate channels to elicit and to receive God's blessings. Those channels for a Jewish man or woman are the Torah and its mitzvot.
Excellent. And so the Rebbe would advise people when they were not well are they observing the mitzvah of tefillin for men? Do they have mezuzahs on their home? Are the mezuzahs kosher? Have them checked to make sure that they're kosher. Have tefillin checked to make sure they're kosher. Do you observe the kosher dietary laws? Are you studying Torah? We have a special regiment of Torah that the Rebbe would advise Hasidim to study. Are you giving tzedakah every single day? All of these things actually impact our physical state. So let's watch this video.
That was July 1989. I wasn't feeling well. I had pains in my stomach. And I went to my gastroenterologist, who was a big mumcha, and he took an endoscopy And he's straightforward. He says, I got very bad news to tell you. I said, well, what? And you got a big problem. You got to go get x-rays and everything, and you have to have an operation on your stomach, otherwise you're in dire sakana. I called the 770. Benjamin Klein answered the phone. And Benjamin went into the Rebbe, and he came right back and called me up, but the Rebbe said that I should look over all my mezuzahs that was in this house, and my Rashi's film, and Rabbeinu Tam's film. And I went over to the Sefer. So he takes out the Parsha, and he shows me that it's the word Zoch and Zikaron was blotted out. You can't use these film, he says. He had just written 4 Pashas for Shel Rosh, so I bought it from him on the spot because I didn't want to be without film. And Baruch Hashem, I had the operation, and Baruch Hashem, everything was all right. And I called Binyamin to thank the Rebbe, that the Rebbe saved my life. So the Rebbe said to him, this is the refuah.
אני מוכן לנצל ולבקש את ברכתך לקצין שנמצא אצלי במשלחת וקיבל לו עלינו שיתוק, שמו עודד יונה בן שרה.
רציתי להזדכה בשבילו, וכדאי שיבדקו התפילין שלו, וזה יש לי בביטחון. ברכה והצלחה.
תודה רבה, תודה רבה.
כאן איננו מובן ביוחס ביטחון גשמי, אבל מובן ביוחס ביטחון רוחני. בשורות טובות.
Rabbi, in the last about 2.5 years, I've got a pain in my body, like in my muscles, like a stiffness that moves around. I've been to doctors and the Abisters to Duncan, they've said there's nothing wrong with this or that, but I still get the pains from time to time. Could I ask you as well, Rabbi, if you don't mind, if I could have a bracha for that? It's been about 2.5 years.
Probably you must do something about the kashrus, about the observing the laws of kashrus. Maybe there is something wrong with Chol Yisrael or Pas Yisrael. Als je het meeste is aan kashrus, van de vierde stimme, helpt ons dus zoals dat we weten niet. Dat is dit is ook gemaakt.
העיניים שלי מאוד מאוד חלשות העיניים, ואני מבקשת ברכה לרפואה שלמה.
אני צריך להזדהה בקידוש ובהבדלה. זה עצב לבריאה של מים.
The last segment of the class is that based on everything that we've just learned, the Rebbe actually expanded his view, or the Rebbe hadn't expanded the view on the role of a doctor. And that is that based on everything above, we realize that there's much more in play for a person's health than just administering physical medicine. And that is the spiritual, the emotional, psychological parts of what's going on within a person. The disposition of all of these areas of one's life actually impact a patient. So if we really care about a patient, then we're going to care for every aspect of the person. It's like I know that when people reach out to me, sometimes it may be for some spiritual assistance. Whether it's a special event in life or whatever it may be, but I also know that probably what will serve them more than anything I'm going to say is simply smiling to them. Just something simple as that puts a person into a different disposition, and that actually assists them greatly. And the Rebbe was a very big advocate for doctors understanding that serving patients has you have to give the patients more than just the medical advice, but also the attention. We have a letter that the Rebbe wrote thanking a doctor for visiting his wife at a very inconvenient hour. And he says, I surely don't need to explain to you that when a doctor shows personal care to a patient, that in and of itself does so much for the patient. Never mind even when before you even start looking at what's going on. So that's something that the Rebbe advocated, and this is, if you remember in the beginning of the class, I spoke about, we discussed the Rebbe advocating that the hospitals in Israel be called a Beit Refuah, not Beit HaCholim, right? Not the house of the sick, but a house of healing. So this was the Dr. Mordechai Shiny, who the Rebbe wrote this to, who shares his interaction with the Rebbe. Let me just see if I can.
Professor Mordechai Shani serves as Professor of Healthcare Systems at Tel Aviv University and is a recipient of the Israel Prize. In 1976, while serving as Director General of the Sheba Medical Center, he was part of a group that arrived at 770 for the celebration of Simchas Torah.
הרבי הגיע אלינו, שוחח עם כל אחד מאיתנו כדקה, מאחר והוא שאל אותי מאיפה אני, וסיפרתי לו שבאתי מבית חולים, הוא מיד שאל אותי מדוע אתם קוראים לזה בית חולים ולא בית רפואה, ואמר לי, אתה יודע מה, בהזדמנות בוא ניפגש ונשוחח יותר בשקט ובניחותא. כעבור בערך שנה, אינני זוכר את התאריך המדויק, בתיאום עם הרב קליין נקבעה פגישה עם הרבי. הפגישה הייתה בחדרו, חדר צנוע, שמתאים לאישיותו של הרבי. היא לא עסקה בנושאים אישיים. היא עסקה למעשה בשיחה בערך של כחצי שעה, 25 דקות, שדנה למעשה בעולם הרפואה. ראשית, אחד הדברים המעניינים, שגם מאפיינים את הרבי, שהוא שם דגש על נפשו של האדם, וראה בנושא הנפש מקור לחוזקו של האדם. ככל שהאדם בעל נפש חזקה יותר, הוא יכול להתמודד יותר טוב בחיים. הגענו דרך אגב לשיחה גם על ביקורי אנשים אצל חולים, והוא הדגיש את החשיבות של זה, לא רק מבחינת זו שאתה בא לבקר חולה, אלא בזה שאתה בא לחזק אותו. אתה נותן לו תחושה שהוא איננו לבד, שזה אחד הדברים היפים בקהילה החרדית, שבו הקהילה עוזרת לאדם החולה ומחזקת את נפשו. בהמשך דיברנו על נושא נוסף, שהוא גם כן מאוד מעניין, כי הוא מתקשר למגמה שיש היום ברפואה, וזה נושא מקומו של האדם בבריאותו. אמר הרבי, נכון שיש רופאים, אבל הוא אמר משהו שהיום מתחילים לדבר על זה, שבאים ונסים לשכנע את בני האדם, אל תתלה את יהבך ברופאים, אם אתה לא תדאג לבריאותך, אם אתה לא תקפיד לאכול נכון, להתעמל, לישון טוב, אתה תפגע בבריאותך. זהו נושא שהיום בעולם המערבי קוראים לו patient empowerment. חזק, תעצים את האדם ותשכנע אותו שהוא אחראי לבריאותו. מעניין שהרבי לפני 30 שנה כבר מדבר על העצמת האדם, שהאדם הוא אחראי לבריאותו. הרי זה כלל בסיסי במה שנקרא רפואה מונעת וקידום בריאות. אתה אחראי לבריאותך, הרופא יכול לעזור לך, הוא לא יכול להחליף אותך. מבחינה זו, השיחה הייתה מאוד מעניינת, כי הרבי בכמה נושאים למעשה הקדים את זמנו. אפרופו דרך אגב, הסוגיה שהוא התחיל איתי בפגישה הראשונה, למה הוא קורא בית רפואה? אומר הרבי, אתם שמים דגש על החולי, אני שם את הדגש על הבריאות. אני רוצה להדגיש שאתם הולכים למקום שרוצה לשפר את הרפואה שלכם, את הבריאות שלכם, לא את החולי שלכם. זה מתקשר בדיוק לתפיסה של הרבי, שבא ואמר, רבותיי, הבריאות תלויה בך, אל תקדש את החולי, תקדש את הבריאות.
One last interesting thing is that the Rebbe also, when he he once wrote a letter, I believe it was. Yeah, he sent a message to a conference of Orthodox Jewish physicians that was held in New York in 1955. And what was his message to them? That being that you are Orthodox rabbis, you're Orthodox doctors, religious doctors, when you see patients, you should speak to them about spirituality, and you should and support them in that way. Whereas someone recently once mentioned to me, a doctor, that when my patients are in my office, they don't have any choice but to listen to me, and I share with them my religious views. So, yeah, I don't know how strong you should get on that, but the idea about there are universal religious messages that we can share, and there are soft ways that we can convey these things to individuals, and that a doctor can be very instrumental in helping enhancing a person's health in doing that. So, thank you very much, everyone. Hope you enjoyed tonight's class, and next week, Healthy at Heart, explore how positivity creates a healthy self-concept for navigating anxiety and mental health challenges. Another great class coming up. Have a good night, everyone.